In one of my previous videos, we discussed the newest Figma features, advanced prototyping and variables. Today we will have some practice and we'll build a fully functioning design quiz game, kind of similar to Jeopardy, but not quite. To do that, we only need 3 frames, 3 components, and a bunch of variables. Hi, my name is Julia, I'm a product designer, and we talk about design things on this channel. We will cover everything you need to know about these features. String variables, color variables, Boolean and number variables, advanced prototyping, and finally, modes. I will start creating the game from scratch, so you would be able to recreate the whole process on your own. You can also access the community file that I created specifically for this video. The link will be in the description box. Without further ado, let's open Figma. First of all, I want to demonstrate the result that we are aiming for in this tutorial. We're inside the community file, and I remind you that you can access it with the link in the description. As you can see, here we have only 3 frames where a game lives and a very small number of interactions. I want to emphasize that if we didn't have features like advanced prototyping or variables, the task of creating such a game inside Figma would be much more difficult. Instead of 3 frames, we'd have hundreds of frames, and I don't even want to try to guess the number of prototype connections. That's because we'd have to anticipate and manually create all the possible outcomes when, say, Julia chose this question first, or this one, or any of the 12 questions. The same thing for Norman, Dave, and Jasmine. And we'd also have to anticipate all the outcomes when they answered a question correctly or incorrectly, all the possible totals, and so on. Using variables and advanced prototyping, on the other hand, we can specify the logic of the game, allowing us to create complex prototypes without too much work. We'll look at this section below later when we talk about modes. Now let's open the prototype and see how our game works. So in the first frame, we see a board of the participants. We see their name and total. This is where all the points a player got for correctly answered questions are recorded. We also have 4 categories of questions, each containing 3 questions with different values. The first thing we need to do is choose a contestant. Let's go from left to right and choose Julia first. We can see that her total is highlighted, which is an indicator that this participant is currently active. Now let's pick a question. Let's say this one. As you can see, we automatically start a timer for 30 seconds, during which the participant has to give an answer. We also see the text of the question and the See Answer button. The question is, what is the Figma default font? Now, since I'm the person who collected both the questions and the answers, I know it's Inter. Let's check if I'm right. Yep, it's Inter, and in the third and final frame we see the answer and 2 buttons, right and wrong, one of which we have to click depending on whether the participant answered correctly or not. In this case we choose right. And now we can see that Julia's total has increased by exactly the number that was promised for a question, i.e. 200 points. Also, the question card has changed its state, and now we see that this question has already been answered. Let's pick the next player, Norman, and pick a question. Again, we can see that the timer has automatically started, and the question is how many heuristics Jacob Nielsen is suggesting to use. Let's say Norman doesn't know which heuristics we're talking about. Let's see the answer. The answer is very long, I won't read the whole thing, but we know that there are 10 such heuristics and Norman's answer is wrong, so we press the wrong button. And as we expected, Norman's total hasn't changed, it's still 0 because he gave the wrong answer. Let's do the same thing for Dave and Jasmine and back to Julia. Let's pick a question. The question is, what is the default font size in most browsers? Again, I know the answer, so it's 16. That's right, we click the right button again, and we are back on the board. As you can see, Julia's total has changed by 600 points, which is exactly the value of the question. This is the behavior we want to achieve. The game ends when there are no unanswered questions left on the board, and the player with the most points wins. Now let's close the prototype and look at the components used in these frames. This component, the timer component, I'm not going to look at in detail today. I will record a separate video on how to create a timer in Figma using advanced prototyping and variables. Now let's go to the demo file. You can see that these are the same 3 frames that we saw in the previous file, but this time we don't have any variables here, except for the ones that relate to the timer. We're just going to ignore them today. And there are also no interactions, again, except for those that are set up for the timer to work. The first thing we want to do is, of course, create variables. To do this, without selecting any layer, go to Local Libraries and click Create Variable. In the drop-down menu, we see 4 different types of variables. First up is the color variable, the type of variable that stores colors or hex codes. As you know, colors can also be stored in styles, but the difference between styles and variables is that variables can reference each other. Another difference is that variables do not currently support gradient fields, overlay fields, and video in image fields, but I suspect this may change in the future. Also, it was said that in the future there will be other types of variables, such as font, for example. Next comes the number variable, which is the type of variable that stores numeric information. Next is the string variable, which stores text. And lastly, we see a Boolean variable, an interesting type of variable that stores information about 2 possible states of the element, true or false. This type is probably already familiar to you from working with component properties in Figma. We want to create a question variable. The questions will be stored in text format, so we choose the string variable type. Create the first variable, call it question, and set its value to question. Now I want to create a library of questions. I create another string variable. I write question/font, hence the first category of questions we have, /fonts low. That is the question with the lowest value. Now, why write with a slash? As you can see, if I write the title with a /, Figma automatically creates a group and a subgroup for me with the right titles. Now let's go to the question group, and I'll create additional subgroups for each of the question categories. We don't need to write the question in the beginning now because we're already inside this group. So now we have 4 groups for each of the question categories. Let's fill them with variables for medium and high value questions. Now we need to fill in our questions. I'm not going to type them manually, I have a list of both questions and answers here, so I'll just copy and paste them in the corresponding variable fields. Done, we have created a library of questions for our game. Now we need to create a library of answers. I could go through the same process creating groups and subgroups, but I know that the structure for the answers will be exactly the same as for the questions, because one question corresponds to only one answer. So I just duplicate the question group, rename it to answer, and copy and paste my answers there. Done. Let's also not forget to go back to all the variables and create a separate variable called answer. Later in the video you will understand why we need it. Next, I want to create a library of participants. First, I create a separate participant variable. I set its default value to name, although it's not that important. Then I choose string variable again and type participant/participant1. I call the first participant Julia, then duplicate this variable. Second participant would be called Norman. Third one would be Dave. And the last one, Jasmine. Next, I would like to create variables that determine the value of the questions. Value is measured in number of points, i.e. numbers, so we choose the number variable. I write gain / gain low. Let's go to the gain group. Gain low, i.e. the lowest gain for the right answer, will be 200 points. Let's duplicate it, create gain mid, and set its value to 400. Then gain high is set to 600. Once again, create a variable called gain. We can leave 0 as its default value. Now let's proceed to the next step. Each of the participants has their own total number of points. I want to create a library of variables containing the totals of our participants. Again, choose the type number. I write total / total 1. The total of each participant is 0 at the beginning, so we'll leave the default value as 0. And now I create variables for the rest of the participants. We are almost done with setting up variables. Next, I want the active participants total to be highlighted when I select it with a click, while the other participants total remain or go back to their normal state. To do this, I have created a second variant for the total component, and now I want to create a Boolean variable that will control the state of this component. Let's choose the Boolean variable type. Let's name the variable chosen / chosen1. This one will control the component for the first player. Create the same variables for other players. Leave the default value as false for all of them. Finally, the last group of variables I want to create is color variables. Let's go to the components page and create the first variable. Select the text layer. Click the 4 dots icon here. Then click Add icon. Make sure the variable tab is active and give our variable a name. I want all colors to be stored in the color group, so I write color / accent color. Create variable. I will create variables for the remaining colors in the same way. Now let's place the variables we created where they should be on the frames. Assign the question variable to the question text. Select the text layer, click the variables icon, and select the question variable. Now let's assign the answer variable for the answer text. Now let's assign variables to the names of our players. Now I'm going to demonstrate that using variables, we can go to the variable library at any time, change the value of the variable, and it will automatically be displayed on the frame. I go to Participants, choose Julia, and rename her to Nina. You can see that the name on the frame changed instantly. Now let's rename her back to Julia. We created a special variable that would control the state of the participant component so that the active participant's total would be highlighted. Let's select the participant component and assign the chosen one variable to be responsible for the state of the component. Do the same for the other components. Now I need to define players' totals. I select the text layer to the first player's total and assign it the variable total1. Then do the same for the other layers. Now we need to assign a value to each of the questions. I want the questions to be arranged bottom up from least valuable to most valuable. I select the text layer and assign the gain low variable. Gain mid will be assigned to the question below, and the last one is gain high. Now the same to other question tiles. All variables are ready, and now we can start prototyping and building the logic of our game. Go to the Prototype tab. The first action we perform in a game is selecting a participant. So we select the participant component. What should happen when we click on the participant component? The first thing is that we want the game to know that the active participant now is this one, in this case Julia. On click we choose Set Variable. Participant to participant 1. Now our game knows that if we click on this component, participant number 1 becomes active. We also want the component to be highlighted when clicked and the components of any other players to change to the default state. Again, we select Set Variable, chosen 1 to True. Then we want to set chosen 2 to False. Also set chosen 3 to False. And set chosen 4 to False. Done. Now let's do the same for the rest of the participants' components. Our next step during the game is to pick a question. When we click on the card, the first thing we want to do is to navigate to the frame with the question. So we select Navigate to Question. We also want to make sure that when we click on this card, we see the question we want. So we select Set Variable, Question to Fonts Low. We also want to let the game know what the value of the question is. So we choose Set Variable, Gain to Gain Low. And lastly, we want the card component to change its state. So we select Change to, answered is True. Now we need to do the same for the remaining cards. Let's move on to the frame with the question. We want to see the correct answers for the questions by clicking on the See Answer button. So first we select Navigate to Answer. Now let's use conditional interaction to create all question and answer scenarios. If question is equal to font low, set variable, answer to font slow. We say that if the selected question is the cheapest one from the category fonts, we should display a corresponding answer. The similar condition for the next answer. If question is equal to font mid, then set variable answer to font mid. Now let's create this condition for all 12 questions. And we're done. We move on to the last frame, the answer frame. Now, if the contestant answers incorrectly, we simply go back to the first frame, nothing really happens. But if a player answers correctly, they should get the points they deserve. Let's use conditional interaction again. And we say if participant is equal to participant 1, then we want to set variable total 1, so we want their total to be equal to total 1 plus gain. That is, we take their current total and add the points for the answer question to it. We set the value of the question earlier, so we don't need to specify if it's 200 or 400 or 600. Now let's create the same condition for the other participants. And it's all done. Now let's run the preview and see if our game works. Let's select Julia and select the question. Now instead of the placeholder, we see the actual question. And it is exactly the question we'd expect to see clicking on this tile. Again, on the place of the placeholder, we now see the text of the answer from the library. Julia's total is 200 points. Let's pick Norman next and imagine he still knows nothing about heuristics. Total is still 0 as we expected. Next up is Dave. And finally Jasmine. Now I want to see if Julia's total will continue growing. Again, the right question and the right answer. We see that points have been added, meaning that our game works exactly as expected. Now let's give our game a new look using modes. Let's go to local variables, click on the plus icon. I want to call the first one classic and the new one strawberry. I want to keep the questions, the answers, the names of the participants, and everything else the same. The only thing I want to change is the colors. I have a set of colors already prepared, so I will just quickly enter them into the fields for the strawberry mode. Now copy this section, place it below this one, call it strawberry, change the color of the section. And now let's change the layer display mode to strawberry. As you can see, we've got the same game but in different colors. Let's run the preview to make sure everything works exactly the same. So we can pick a player, their total is highlighted. If we pick a question, we see an accurate question and an accurate answer. Let's do this a couple more times. Everything seems to work fine. That's it for today. Hopefully you now have a better understanding of why we need variables and advanced prototyping and how to work with them. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I promise to answer all of them. Comment, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.